This program is proudly brought to you by the Peel Dance Bar, corner of Peel and Wellington Streets, Collingwood.
McLean, and it's Ben TV, and it's blah blah blah. It's Monday the 13th of August, and we're here at the Peel Hotel, and we're not drinking right now, but we'll be around the corner in the other bar before you know it, Tom. Tonight we're going to talk about a very, very serious subject, and I don't want you to get depressed because we're talking about mental health. I've got several people here. I've got the community sector, I've got the health sector, and I've got a health consumer. Drew Dax. Drew, you're our token mental health service consumer.
Yes.
And you've had a bit of mental illness in your time?
Quite a bit, yeah.
Quite a bit?
No, not so much quite a bit, but like various stages. It's a roller coaster.
You've been up and down. We've all been up and down. Rowena. Rowena Allen, you've probably been up and down too.
Up and down the Hume Highway a lot.
Up and down the Hume Highway. You run the Cutting Edge
Youth Services Uniting Care, yep, in Shepparton.
That goes from Shepparton all the way through to where?
To Wallen, so almost Melbourne.
Dear old Wallen. And Jonathon Anderson, you're a GP, aren't you?
That's right.
And you deal with mental health problems in the gay, lesbian, bisexual and transgender community quite regularly.
Well, one of the reasons why I became a GP was when I did the mental health segment, I realised that much of mental health work was actually in general practice, and the stuff that gets to psychiatrists is the pretty severe stuff, but much of the time GPs are doing most of the mental health
Okay,
work.
we'll get on to GPs and where we find ourselves in terms of looking at mental health. After we talk to the consumer, we'll do the consumer first. Okay, Drew, when did you first realise you might have had a problem? Did you know?
Well, I would say probably when I was about 15. 15 years old.
What happened then?
Well, see, as a lot of the viewers would be well aware of, I was a survivor of sexual assault. So I think I became aware of my problem in 1984 when I was about 15, but see, when I was about 11 years old, I was loitering in toilet blocks, which was, I think, just a symptom of what actually was happening to me. So if you'd see it in the context of that, it would have been a good five years before I actually realised that I did have a problem. I mean, how can an 11-year-old be going, why would an 11-year-old be going to a toilet block? I wasn't even sexually active. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Once I got discovered by the police, as I guess we all have been at various stages of our beat careers, I was referred to a psychiatrist, and then the process.
Well, what was that experience like?
Well, that was... Actually, he was very gentle and very good to me. I mean, and he explained to me that I actually didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah.
You know. And
this is when you were 11?
No, this was when I was about 15.
Okay.
15. I've been doing it from 11 till so 4 years. And yeah, he actually, part of my problem was guilt, you see, and he actually helped me alleviate a lot of that guilt.
So
But I still had a long way to go.
So he sat you down and you talked about your problems?
But, well, not in the first session, no, but basically we just discussed the incident in the toilet block, discussed the incident of the assault on myself, and I really only had one session with him, and then it wasn't until probably a good 6 months later that I tried to kill myself, and then was referred back to the psychiatrist.
Same psychiatrist?
The same psychiatrist, and then I decided I'm not going to go to school anymore because school was just an absolute nightmare. And then I was referred to the Parkville Adolescent Unit, which is in Poplar Road, Parkville, and was an outpatient, and then definitely dropped out of school, became an inpatient and was there for 6 months, Monday to Friday, and then went home on the weekends.
So, boy, there's a lot of experience there of the health sector. You were comfortable with being a patient? Did you see yourself as a patient?
I actually, at that time, felt that I was just conning the system because I was living in a small country town and I wanted to get out of the town. So at that stage, I don't think I was actually seriously facing the reality of my problems. I was using it as an escape to get away from, because I was also being beaten up by my brother at home and then being beaten up at school. So it was just like...
So it was actually safe in that sense?
Well, no, I wasn't safe at all from anybody, you know. So, so when I went to Parkville, I suddenly became safe. And so I used that as a way of getting out and coming back home to the city, because I was a city boy until 10 and then went to the country and, you know, just like that. So I don't think I was really seriously started to consider my own mental health until probably in the early 90s, when I started to think, like I was probably mid to early 20s, and then I thought, shit, I've got to actually start doing something. And even now, like probably in the last 3 months, like I've been drug free now for 3 months. I mean,
now that's recreational drugs we're talking about,
yeah,
not medication.
Yeah, not medication.
Well, you've had medication.
Yeah, I'm on medication.
You're on medication now.
Basically now, it's depression now associated, you know, and I take medication. It's fabulous. I mean, seriously, people take your medication, you know. I mean, everything's fine. It's fabulous, you know.
It's
so you've just got to do it.
Medication's a good thing. There's
a stigma attached with taking pills and being on medication. You know, I mean, like you've got a cold, so you take a pill for the cold. But like when it's with the mind, people think like you're absolutely crazy. Keep away. He's taking, you know, psych drugs and all that sort of shit. But it's like, you know.
In fact, it's pretty normal.
Oh look! If without my medication, I'd be in a total nutcase.
Actually, Jonathan, that's something that you must think about every day when you're practicing and talking to people about how they're feeling, whether they need medication or not. Where do you sit as a GP talking to people who have never had medication before? How do you introduce them to the idea that they might need medication?
Well, the majority of people with depression don't need medication, but when people do need it, it certainly can be quite a shock to their system. And the problem with depression is that lots of people don't really understand depression. They think depression is some sort of minor feeling that people have when they, sort of faced with something bad. But actually, true depression or really bad clinical depression just blackens your whole day. The whole day is dark. Your outlook is dark. I don't know what your...
I felt like an egg.
Like an egg?
Yeah, and just a fragile shell, and on the inside was just blackness. And that's how it felt. And now the blackness is diminishing and I'm filling up.
But there's a whole spectrum of mental illness, isn't there? You can be a little bit depressed and not be all black.
That's right. You can be a little bit depressed, and certain situations can make you depressed. People who come in and say, "My boyfriend just left me. My mum's sick. I've just lost my job with one of the one tel or something." People like that are depressed in a way that's reacting to a situation, and if the situation had been different, they probably wouldn't have been depressed. But it's really hard for people when they are depressed to realise that they need help, because that's the process of depression actually almost stops you from seeking help. I did a study about 10 years ago in Glasgow, and I looked at whether people with depression actually went to the doctor more or less, and they went less. So that myth of depressed people turning up at the doctor is rubbish. It's hard to identify it.
I wish there was a pill that would make you be able to remember to take your medication.
It must be hard.
Because that's the big problem.
What happens if you don't take it?
For myself personally, it's like a very slow, gradual decline, very slowly. It may takes about 3 to 4 weeks, and then I suddenly realise, God, I'm not as happy as I was 4 weeks ago. What's wrong? Why am I looking in the mirror and thinking I'm so ugly? Why don't I want to go out and leave my bedroom anymore? Why do I think that everything I'm doing is useless and I'm going to die anyway, so why keep going?
Actually, regular viewers of Blah 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 would know exactly what Drew's like when he's down as well as when he's up.
Up and down.
From week to week.
Sometimes I don't even know anymore.
Now, Rowena, one of the other things Drew was talking about was being in the country and being depressed and wanting to get out of a country town.
Yeah.
You must have to deal with kids, or adults who've got that sort of feeling.
We certainly try to find young people in an early stage before maybe as the referral point to a GP, or programs that we can run ourselves. They're called early intervention and prevention. But it's nice to hear someone who's come right through. In our job, we sort of see young people at that point, and often we don't see them all the way through. They move to Melbourne, lose touch, lose track.
We actually should explain what your service does. It's called Cutting Edge Youth Service.
Yep.
You cover from Wallan to Shepparton, but what do you actually do?
We do support programs for young people. We've also got a program for same-sex attracted young people. through some Vic Health funding, and we're developing a group and some chat spaces on the internet so that they can meet each other, and when they do get together, one of the things they do share in common is the sense of, at some stage they have been depressed, all sorts of...
Now, that doesn't necessarily assume that if you're gay, lesbian, bisexual or transgender and you're living in the country that you're on a downer.
No.
Because it can actually be a very happy life in the country as well as here in the city.
Absolutely.
There is something that we should actually face up to, and that is being gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender means that we do have a higher rate of mental illness. We're not always as happy as heterosexuals. I know it's actually a little bit of a surprise, but it doesn't necessarily mean that if we're GLBT that we are mentally ill.
Not at all, and I think that's the most important thing. It's the reaction of other people often to our sexuality and our reaction to our own sexuality that often leads young people to find it difficult when they start to discover that they don't fit into this model that they've been brought up in. And of course the family model is a heterosexual model because that's the majority of people are that way. But
so
it's not,
you reckon
just because
it's
it's common doesn't mean...
It's okay for us to feel a little bit depressed about being GLBT?
No, I reckon it's a reaction that many of us do experience as we're growing up. We grow up with shame and guilt and all these things that get to our core and stop us from feeling self-esteem, stop us from feeling comfortable and normal, which is what we are. And
most of us, yes, most of us are normal.
All of us are normal, really.
Yeah. We don't have to feel shame. We don't have to feel guilt. That's not a bad line when you actually look at those sorts of issues of mental illness, the gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender community, and the sorts of issues that we might face. What do you think is the biggest issue in this sort of field, Jonathan?
When people are growing up, is shame and guilt and poor self-esteem and risk of suicide. If you ask so many people, when they realise about their sexuality, they think of killing themselves. They think it's such a terrible thing, or it's so severe and intense.
It is pretty normal, and we shouldn't feel guilty about that either. We're just about out of here for Blah 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 and Bent TV here on Channel 31 Melbourne, and we'll be back in a very short time with more Blah 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 and Bent TV. This is Blah Blah Blah, this is Bent TV, and this is Channel 31 Melbourne, and we're talking about the happy subject of mental health and its corollary, mental illness. We've got Jonathon Anderson, Rowena Allen and Drew Dax, and we're happily making our way through the issues of mental health. Jonathan, there are several forms of mental health as well as mental illness, and we're focusing on mental illness. What are the sorts of problems that you see as a GP?
Well, the main problems we see are depression and anxiety, social phobias, which are sort of phobias about going out and interacting. People would say the mild version of that is shyness, but we see people in that situation. And we see things like obsessive compulsive disorders and things like schizophrenia and drug and alcohol problems, which those are the sort of five main areas.
Let's start with depression. I mean, what's depression? That's just feeling low, feeling like the egg that Drew was talking about before.
Depression is where your mood is low, and it's often associated with anxiety, and you may find that you feel agitated or you just can't focus or concentrate on everything, or you feel that you're turning over bad things in your mind all the time about yourself or about the world. That's depression. It often affects your sleep. You have difficulty either getting to sleep or you wake up early, your appetite and your concentration. It starts to affect your world.
And what do you do if you've got depression?
First thing is to recognise it. The second thing is to try and seek help. the second thing of seeking help is the hard bit for most people, and talking to a health professional. I say a GP because I'm a GP, but talking to a counsellor, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, any one of the kind of services that Rowena works for, that are open for people to say, I've got depression, I want to do something about it. It's not just about taking pills to fix it. That's an important part for some depression. There are lots of different ways that you might address it.
Okay, you talked about phobias. Shyness. I'm very shy myself, so I know all about the process of not wanting to go out.
Yeah.
How do I deal with that shyness?
Yeah.
How do I break through my shell of shyness?
Well, if you're finding that your shyness or your fear of being embarrassed is really getting to you, then if you go and speak to, often a psychologist can help, or a psychiatrist, do something called cognitive, which means thinking behavioural therapy, which is very sort of simple work that you do. That can help quite a lot. And probably trying to, most people who have that problem avoid doing something about it.
Cognitive therapy sounds painful, I would have thought.
No,
what does it actually involve?
It involves talking about the problem and trying to break it up into the smallest parts, and then trying to make a small step towards achieving something.
Okay. Now, this obsessive compulsive disorder, I've got a mate who's got that, I think. I mean, one of his boyfriends used to get into trouble for not wiping the sink down properly.
That's anal retentive.
That's anal retentive. Okay. I think a lot of us know about anal retentive. I mean, what do you do about anal retentive?
I don't know.
Well, you're blushing now.
No,
You've got two, haven't you?
No, I'm not going to comment on that one. Obsessive compulsive, we're laughing about it, but it's a really important issue. People can sometimes become so obsessed with one particular behaviour or compulsive. I get it a bit. If I go out and I haven't shut the front door properly, or think I haven't, I have to go back, and sometimes I have to go back twice.
Yes.
It doesn't happen very often, but...
Well, have I got it if I see that... What was the Jack Nicholson movie... where we had all those piles of neat paper.
Good Enough or something.
Yeah, that was fantastic. I loved those piles of paper. I like a nice, neat pile of paper. Have I got a bit of that, Ben?
All of us have a bit of that, and what it is when it starts to affect your life.
Yeah.
When it starts to damage your life. When you start to find that you're not able to do things because you're so busy going back to shut the front door.
Yeah. Or pile of paper.
Well, you need to wash your hands every 2 minutes. Or
clean that sink. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I think the sink cleaning is a really serious problem. Drew, what's your sink like? When you're depressed,
What's my sink like at the moment?
When you're depressed, do you find yourself doing strange things?
Well, yeah, I do. I've never actually officially been diagnosed with an obsessive compulsive disorder. But I actually believed that I did up until about 3 months ago. But it really, truly, it was probably about, say, 3 or 4 years ago. And it involved around getting stoned and pornography and taking ecstasy at home. And I would sit in my room for anything up to 36 hours and just surrounding myself with porn and constantly looking at the pictures.
The image
over and again. And then I would go through this pile, and then that pile, and that pile, and that pile, and then I'd pick this pile and pick the best from that pile, and then I'd have that pile, and then I'd go through that pile, and then 12 hours later I've completely forgotten what was over there, and I'd be doing this and doing this and doing that and doing that. And seriously, that sort of behaviour really only sort of stopped until about, say about May this year.
Yeah.
But
But how did that happen? How did you stop it? Did you recognise it, like Jonathon was talking about before?
Well, I think, with my problem with porn, right, I sort of thought, okay, I've got to overconsume, so I got myself a job in a pawn shop.
Yes.
Right, and that's been a gradual decline. I'm so over porn now.
Yes, it's sort of like your bus
flooded yourself.
And it's like a chocolate addiction, and you get a job in a chocolate factory, you never ever want to eat chocolate again.
Yeah.
Like, I'm so over porn. Like I've actually moved house. There's no porn in where I'm living now. It's all in storage.
Jolly good.
You know what I mean?
It's all in storage.
Yeah, and it's yeah.
How many cubic metres of porn? No, that's the other show. That's the other show.
I've got a storage shell in Richmond with boxes of the stuff.
Now, that actually raises the issue of having more than one condition at the same time.
Well, that's the thing. People aren't simple boxes, and they never are. And we all get features at times when if people suffer from mental health problems, it's not ever as simple as the classic case of or whatever. And that's the thing that I find the most fascinating part of working in this area with people who come and present with different problems is that they're never the same, and that's what makes it interesting. That's why.
Rowena, in terms of the difference between men and women, have you noticed there's any difference between young lesbians and young gay men in dealing with mental health issues?
I think traditionally young women are more open with their friends about, in my experience, that they talk to each other. Young men, we've had a higher rate of depression or suicide behaviour or attempts with actual young gay men than we have with women. And I think that's a cultural thing about how they talk and how they work with each other, and that it's the same thing, that young women are sort of open to going and seeking help, and young men tend to keep it to themselves and bottle it up. That's why we find if they can actually meet and talk with each other, they realise that they are incredibly normal, like we all are, and start to talk about some of those issues. But I suppose I've been to the hospital more times with young men than I have with young women.
So what's the classic circumstance in that case? So a kid tries to kill himself?
Yeah, pretty much. Or look, even the parents come out to the mother and father. There was one young guy whose parents were sure that he had a mental illness. He didn't. He was just gay. And they persisted with psychologists and psychiatrists and the whole lot. It was real system abuse for that young guy.
And how did that suddenly turn around for him? Did he make a decision?
Well, it was actually a professional who said, "I think you're just gay, are you?" And he said, "Yes." And the professional said, "Well, you don't have a mental illness." And he said, "Well, good." And his whole life turned around.
Well, it isn't so long ago that the psychiatrists and psychologists defined homosexuality of one kind or another as an illness. That's been a big turnaround.
So many terrible things have been done in the name of psychiatry, but one of the worst parts, I think, of psychiatry is the way that people in the past were labelled as being sick and had ECT for being gay and lesbian or those.
You're not suggesting that the medical profession got things wrong, Jonathan?
We get things wrong all the time. We try not to.
I can tell you stories.
I'm sure you could. And
let's get on to those.
And the current mental health system itself is shocking at the moment. Just the
public health system.
The public health system is just shocking.
Well, there's three issues we've got to deal with. First, the ECT. What is ECT?
ECT itself is not actually a bad procedure for people who have very severe depression. It's basically where you make the brain have a small epileptic fit while the person's under sedation with an anaesthetic. The kind of images from old movies of people going like this, they're not real. But what that does, for some reason, is help people with very profound depression.
Now, the medical profession don't know why, do you?
Nope, no idea at all.
You haven't got a clue why it actually works for some people.
There's lots of things
to
we
actually
don't know why
get
they
an
work.
electrical charge through the body.
Ralph, you don't really think that we know how half the drugs we use work,
Did you
but
know,
we just know they do.
Did you know that the Romans used to wrap people's heads up with electric eels, and that was the earliest
electric
form
eels?
Yeah, electric eels, and it was the earliest form of ECT.
No, I didn't know that.
That's really interesting.
The things that go on in your head, Drew, that you've remembered. It's fantastic.
Once I started taking my medication 18 months ago, and I was prescribed the right thing for the first time, I felt like I was eating for 2 weeks, and then I started remembering things from like when I was 15, 14, 13, and it all started coming back.
When good antidepressants work, they work so well. That's the most.
It gave me back my life.
Yeah.
Seriously, I've got my life back.
Did you change your doctor, or did your doctor change the medication?
I changed my doctor. I ended up going to the Paran Market Clinic and saw Norm Roth,
fantastic.
And he prescribed me Oryx or something like that, and it's just changed my life. It's
fantastic.
I used to go to this dodgy doctor in.
No, we're not.
I'm not going to mention his name, but he keeps pushing Stelazine onto me, and I mean it's like, and I take that, and I was going like this after a couple of few days. The side effects were absolutely horrific, and then I'd stop. I wouldn't do it, but this medication is just marvellous.
You see, that's general practitioners do deal with so much mental health, many people with mental health problems that, and often we do see people who've been through the system and they've just, had drugs thrown at them because that's what the doctor thinks everyone should be on.
And also it's the drug companies too, and the kickbacks, free holiday and news.
You don't get the kickbacks. What you get is you get a lot of pressure to prescribe antidepressants, and you get a pressure to prescribe a particular one because they tell you it's better.
Right.
And that's all bullshit. There's a number of different things that work for different people. That's the reality.
I want to know what happens with you, Rowena, when you find a doctor that doesn't know what he or she is doing. What do you do? You've got a kid that's you've taken to the hospital and the doctor doesn't know what they're doing.
It's just always a drama. You can actually, what we do now is we have particular GPs that we like to use, and we'll make appointments with that GP and make sure that and then slowly, part of what we need to do is educate, particularly rural GPs. I'm not going to pick on them too much, but just to really how to see a young gay and lesbian person and not scare them off to death. It's a constant thing. Any gay or lesbian or bisexual or transgender person really, but particularly young people, they can get pretty nervous at the best of times, particularly when the GP, of course, may play tennis with their mum or golf with their dad.
In a country town, it's much more likely than it would be in a metropolitan circumstance.
So it's an ongoing issue.
Yeah. Well, we're just about out of here for this segment anyway. On Blah Blah Blah, we're talking about mental health. This is BET TV, this is Channel 31 Melbourne, and we'll be back any moment. And we're back here on Blah 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 on BET TV on Channel 31 Melbourne. We're at the Peel Hotel, but we're not drinking right at the moment. We'll be around the corner on the other bar before you know it. We're talking about mental health. We're being quite jolly about mental health this week with Jonathon Anderson, with Rowena Allen, and with Drew Dax. We were hearing at least a couple of you talk about how appalling the health system is. But it was a generalisation. For somebody with a mental illness, why is the health system not working?
The reason why the health system, in my opinion, isn't working sometimes for people with mental illness is that the system is set up in a way that sometimes seems to put up barriers to access to care, and there's also limiting resources for mental health. And the current federal and state governments don't fund mental health care in the same way as they do perhaps for whiz-bang machines in intensive care.
It's not as much of a vote winner, I guess, as I don't know, being able to get something for a cold or a flu.
It's not so much as a vote winner. If you look at the cardiac surgeons are the heroes in our communities, not the mental health professionals. And unfortunately, people don't understand mental health issues, and so that the governments don't put money into it.
But aren't you just isn't that specialist envy on your part?
No, I'm not. I don't feel less to be a GP. I chose to be a GP.
Yeah.
It's not about specialist envy. I'm talking about the whole system throughout. My colleagues, specialist colleagues who are excellent, many of them, there's still a lack of funding for providing care that really is appropriate for the majority of people.
How do you decide which psychiatrist you might refer to?
Yep, we have a group of psychiatrists that we use that we've built up over the years to know who's good for a particular problem. We use a lot of psychologists though at the Carlton Clinic. We refer people a lot of the time to psychologists if people can afford it, and also counselling services, free counselling services like the VAC or Bouverie.
So a large proportion of your patients in your clinic are gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender. A large proportion of your doctors are even in that sort of context. What about your psychiatrists and psychologists?
We tend to
Do you have to be a porter or a dark psychologist or psychiatrist to understand it?
Of course not. You just have to have an open mind and to accept that we're all different, and being gay and lesbian is completely normal, and if they don't accept that, then we wouldn't refer them.
Completely normal. Drew, do you feel completely normal
Well, as far as like the roller coaster is concerned, but my creative process is like, I mean, I'm a visual artist and a performing artist and a total eccentric.
Yes.
And it's taken me years to actually realise that my eccentricity is not part of a mental illness, it's just part of me. So,
It's one of your most lovable characteristics.
That's one of the most important things to say. Eccentricity is normal. And it's fun. And it's,
Well, you're English, Jonathan, aren't you? So, you know,
yes, I can be eccentric.
but eccentricity is okay. We don't have to all be the same.
Exactly right.
Yeah. The public health system for you, Drew, you were agreeing with Jonathan before about how appalling it is.
Yeah, I'd say so. Like, I would go to doctors desperately crying for help, you know, and like I'd get referred to this you know, psychiatrist or this one or this one or this occupational therapist or this social.
So you were getting service.
Well, I was getting service, but like it just wasn't happening.
It wasn't working for you.
Yeah, it just like it's hard to explain.
With all due respect, and of course you know I'm going to contradict you when I say that, it sounds like you would have been a challenging patient.
Yeah, I guess I must.
You wouldn't have been the easiest person to walk
But
through.
the system needs to be able to deal with that.
But also,
The
you
system
see,
needs to
the
be able
fact
to
is,
do-
but see, you see, we do have a public health system, thank God, in this country.
That's right.
I mean, you know what I mean? And like, and I was capable of going to the Paran Market Clinic, Paran Community Health Centre, pay $6.50 and see a counsellor. I mean, in some countries we don't even have that.
That's right.
You know, I mean, this is the most luckiest nation on earth.
But we need to keep it. We need to keep it lucky. Is what I'm trying to say. Is we can run the system
sure.
down, and it's not
You
the
know.
people who work in the system that are wrong. It's the lack of funding. It's the,
It's also
certain
unevenness too. I mean, we're talking about the country and city. There's a big difference, isn't there?
I think it's
Absolutely.
the similarities is that the health system has to be flexible. Young people don't fit into boxes, you know, and they might have other issues going on, drug and alcohol issues, as well as a mental health issue, and sometimes a service just deals with one issue, you know, and we need to be flexible in the way we case mix or
So you're suggesting that gay, lesbian, bisexual and transgender young people might drink and take drugs more often than straights?
well, yeah, some of the research is heading that way.
Yeah,
It really
the
is,
research
and,
does show something like that. Jonathan, what's the difference? Well, how does it mix in with mental health and mental illness issues when we start talking about drugs and alcohol?
well, sometimes people will like to use things like alcohol, and many people use drugs as a recreational way of making their life more interesting. But sometimes those drugs and alcohol themselves can lead to mental health problems, or they can be a sign of overuse of the drugs and alcohol can be a sign of mental health problems. So if someone's feeling depressed and they go out and take an E on a Saturday night, every Saturday night, they'll find, first of all, that they'll feel happier for the next sort of 4 or 5 hours, maybe, perhaps. But in 2 days later, they'll be feeling
They'll be
sad
coming down
and
and feeling very sorry for themselves.
So they don't help in the long run, and that's the mix often with drug and alcohol problems and mental health. And also things like psychotic illness can sometimes be made worse by drugs and alcohol.
What's a psychotic illness?
Things like schizophrenia and paranoia, those kind of conditions.
And
can be-
hysteria?
Sorry?
And hysteria as well, possibly?
Well, hysteria's, yeah, it's a bit more sort of hard to put it into as a psychotic illness. It's usually sort of thought as more like a kind of depression thing. But
Okay, let's get back to schizophrenia. That's manic depressive, isn't it?
No, manic depressive is where your moods go from happy to sad, but not all in a moment. Over a long time, you may be very depressed, sometimes truly depressed, and sometimes you may be over-elated. And by over-elated, that's where you think everything is good in your world when it's patently not. And that may take a number of months or a number of years, that you have periods of time when you're depressed and when you're too happy.
And there's also rapid cycling.
Yeah,
which is
that's different.
up and down, up and
That's
down.
different. That's when you switch your moods.
Yes, up
That's-
and down, up and down, yeah.
But schizophrenia is a condition where your perception of the world has been altered, and so I often think of it like the filter between what's inside and outside. We all know what's inside is us, and what's outside is the rest of the world. But sometimes the filter between the two can break down, and what then happens is people start to imagine they hear things. Well, they're not imagining it, they are hearing those things, but they're not real things they're hearing. Or they start to become paranoid about the world, or they start to have ideas of that the world is referring to them, that people on the television are talking about them.
We're talking about you now.
And Schizophrenia is very damaging, and schizophrenia needs to be recognised, because people who become schizophrenic, it can damage them if they don't do something about it. But medication's now available which can often keep people really well, really, for a long time.
Aren't schizophrenics dangerous?
Not at all.
Yeah, that's the old traditional sense of schizophrenia.
No, it's, sometimes, unfortunately, schizophrenia can lead to people becoming paranoid and having strange delusions, and those can just occasionally lead people to behave in a criminal way. But there's absolutely no evidence that the majority of schizophrenics or people with schizophrenia, because schizophrenics is a term that people don't like to be used.
Yes.
People who have schizophrenia and are just people like me and you.
So what, like, obviously, what's schizo? Like, is that Latin or Greek or schizo and phrenia? I mean, what's phrenia and what's the schizo component?
Phrenia, I think, oh God, schizo, I can't really tell you actually. I did Greek and Latin.
You're a woman of many words. You surely know the derivation of the word. Why do you ask, Drew?
Well,
I think it's Greek actually.
Like, you know,
I think it would be Greek actually. Phrenia would be a Greek word.
Yeah, I'm just
you do
interested.
Greek here on blah blah blah. That's true.
I gave you some information about the Romans. It's all about, phrenia, schizo. What would the schizo component be?
I think phrenia was something to do with the skull, but I think it's something to do with that, but I really can't tell you. The thing it isn't is a split personality.
Absolutely.
The thing it isn't is multiple personalities.
Right,
the thing it isn't is anything you ever watch on the television.
And Sybil and
There was
those
that
ridiculous
cracking movie
shows.
about schizophrenia. Did you ever?
Was it Sybil, that series? Was that you were talking about?
No, Sybil was. That was.
The one with multi-personality.
Yeah. But there was also a recent one where it had Jim Carrey in it. He's the man with two personalities, and it was so insulting.
Didn't see that.
They were advertising it as he's schizo on the television.
I once went to a séance with these spiritualist people.
No, Drew, I think that's another program.
But no, this séance man said that schizophrenia is like being possessed with another spirit.
Oh yeah. I knew some when I was younger. I got involved with the religious maniacs for a while, and they tried to exercise things like homosexuality and things like schizophrenia from people.
Sort of there are a whole range of different ways of seeing religion and mental illness and gay, lesbian, bisexual and transgender people. Rowena, in the country, churches are pretty big. You're pretty big in churches too, aren't you?
Pretty big in churches. Well, we're actually a Uniting Church agency, so...
So how do you deal with being a representative of God and kids who are seriously rebelling against traditional notions of what the church would support?
One of the first young guys that ever joined one of our programs came from a Catholic family, and his grandmother had been chasing him around the kitchen with holy water, sprinkling on him, trying to do exorcisms.
If that didn't do something to his head, I don't know.
We found that within 16 or 17 young people, the majority of them had been affected by the church in some way, their family or a distant relative or school. And we actually got a minister of religion from the Uniting Church to come to one of the groups who actually apologised on behalf of all churches. It was one of the most emotional evenings with the young people I've ever experienced, and prayed with them, and those who were religious or not religious, or spiritual or not spiritual, all got something out of the day.
That's great. Well, we've actually come to that time of blah 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 when we have to say amen. And A women and A bisexual and A transgender. That was a really bad link. I'm sorry. I really am truly sorry. I hope you're feeling well after thinking about mental health and mental illness here on blah 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 on Bent TV. I'm Ralph McLean. We've had Jonathon Anderson, Rowena Allen and Drew Dax here. Thank you everybody in Bent TV, and thank you to all the viewers. We'll be back next week with another blah blah blah, and if you stay tuned here on Bent TV, Channel 31 Melbourne, you're sure to see a Bent TV special of one kind or another. See you next week.
This program is proudly brought to you by the Peel Dance Bar, corner of Peel and Wellington Streets, Collingwood.